Hello everyone and welcome to the actual album review bit for One Eye Doll. We will start with the One Eye Doll's debut album titled Hole. Released in 2007, this one was produced by Scott Schwartz as well as eventual drummer for the band Jason Sewell, and surprisingly for a debut by a band of this style, it's quite a long album. It clocks in over 55 minutes or a bit less if you listen to the 2018 re-release called Holier. The reason I brought that up is because Hole has 14 songs, the last being titled World in the Bus, whereas Holier doesn't have that song, instead ending with the 13th track, Recipe for Success. The more you know! Still, regardless of the number of songs, I did get a good feel for this band's style pretty easily, I think. It's got a primarily punk feeling to it, but the rest have a metallic and gothic lilt on occasion, feeling quite beefy. The intro riff for the intro song Suicidal Serenade sounds close to Jimi Hendrix's version of America the Beautiful, lampshading some of the album's political content. This is going to sound patronizing, but I didn't expect that much death from a band who appeared at anime conventions to have character models in video games. I will praise the performances. Kimberly Freeman writes most of the music, not to mention being the guitarist and lead vocalist, and drummer Scott Sutton does a good job pulling double duty with the bass as well. I can't help but feel like things would be easier if one of the producers took over an instrument to help things along, but Kim and Scott, do pretty well. The album has a good handling of tone, not sticking to one subject for too long and talking about varying degree of things like religion, addiction, and abuse, managing to match the heavy messages with heavier instrumental work. Even light songs like Scapegoat and the following Trackmaster are good examples of that. Whole itself isn't perfect though. There are some structural issues, mostly with the fact that 14 songs are crammed into 55 minutes, but when they get it right, they really get it right. My favourite song would have to be Hoochie Mama. Despite its title, it's actually, it's not that sort of song. Is all in all, though, Hole is just a solidly entertaining debut album with plenty of good tonal shifts and good musical turns too. I think my cat would approve of it. Ah, there he is. Yeah. We then move on to the band's sequel titled Monster. Released in 2008, it was produced by David Gilmour, and like their debut, it was self-released. And also like their debut, this one would have a remastered version, or rather the remonstered version, which actually isn't me coming up with a bad pun, that is what they called it when they re-released it in 2013. Paul Evans would take up drumming duty for this one, and there wouldn't be any appearance of Jason Sewell here at all, which I think is the only time that's happened in the band's history. One thing I do like is what the album's personnel section says. I don't know if this is because someone edited the wiki page or if the band put it there themselves, but Kimberly Freeman's credits on the album are guitar, vocals, and good looks. I'm not gonna lie, that did get a giggle out of me. Speaking of the main album, though, this one does embrace the band's more goth-ish side, which clears up some confusion as the first song is called Where One Eye Doll. I can't properly tell, but I think it was recorded live, and without context it would sound a bit backwards to put a song introducing your band on your second album, but I like to think that it was because OED were finding their feet with Monster here. Monster is also a gothier title than Hole, just throwing that out there. This album does also fall into that category of following something that came out a year before. Some bands don't get it right, some do, and it's often a very mixed result. But One Eye Doll fell more on the good side than the bad side with this one. There's still plenty of dark lyrics which talk about things like bulimia, death, self-abuse, and relationships. And there's also the song Pow, which is sung entirely in Mandarin Chinese, because no album is truly experimental unless one of the songs is sung in a different language. We all know that. It still sounds good instrumentally, with heavy riffs from Kim, not to mention her singing here, and Paul doing a good job behind the kit, but it's also more experimental with what they do, with some slower songs and one that's basically half acoustic. I think my favourite song overall would have to be Plumes of Death. It might seem a bit rushed, but the album is a good sequel to a strong debut, and it does enough to not regurgitate the old material. Heh, because, believe me earlier, that's why I wrote that joke. We then reach the band's third album, Break. Released in 2010, we would see the debut of Jason Jr. Sewell as the actual drummer this time around, not to mention handling the production duties, and again, the album was self-release. Gotta love a DIY band consisting of only two members that both kick ass in their own rights. As I discussed in my brief history segment video thing, 2009 was the year where the band started to gain more traction and get more attention. All eyes were on them, and they really had to show up for their third album. It's a common phrase that no band truly reaches their highest heights until their third album, and that phrase is rearing its head for this one too. The band skyrocketed thanks to this one, and it's really not difficult to see why. For one thing, the production is a bit better handled. I know that Junior did some work for the band on their debut, but to see him have a bit more control here is actually quite nice to see. I've talked in the past about Converge's album Jane Doe having an iconic cover, and the same could be said about Break by One Eyed Doll. It's the first album to feature the band's signature logo of a one-eyed love heart with angel wings, and in this album's case, a caricature that looks like Kim Freeman on the cover is literally opening her chest and ribs to show it. I mean, that's just fucking cool. In terms of the album's style, the band has solidified what they do. Still a very gothic, punky experience with a lot more vocal harmonizing and usage of keys. It's easy to say that Junior Sewell adds a new element, or several, being the producer and whatnot. The band do add a more emotional side to things. It feels like the lyrics still have that tone too. They're still dark, talking about subjects that we've gone over before, but it doesn't feel like the band are just being weird goth punk for the sake of being weird goth punk. They are showing maturity with this one, and it's still heavy and fun and as zany as it wants to be, which I appreciate. It's hard to find that balance, so yeah. My favourite song would have to be CJ and Run, and all in all, this is another good album with a better handling on production, and the band earned the boom that came from this one, in my opinion. Absolutely. Next is the band's fourth album, Dirty. Released in 2012 and self-released again, this one was produced again by Jason Sewell and someone named Sylvia Massey, making it the first time the band has reached out to a producer that isn't or wasn't a band member. Actually, Dirty denotes quite a few changes and a lot of personnel that isn't really the band themselves. These include an opera vocalist named Ida Moody on the opening track, someone known as Mr. Swimmy Socks who plays banjo on the song Weed, and someone named W. James Stick III performs bass on half of the album's songs. Speaking of those songs, this album starts with Plumes of Death. Yeah, it starts with my favourite song from the second album, but it's 10 seconds longer, has an opera singer, and despite all of these factors, they somehow made that song feel lazy. To be honest, I feel like all of these outside elements for this album just didn't work. There was something so refreshingly honest about the band doing all of their other work to this point all on their own, and you already know that I love it when the band has more creative control over what they get to put out. Even though there was only one other producer here, I feel like that was also part of the problem. I feel like Sylvia noticed that the band had all these good songwriting ideas, but she wanted them to slow it down a lot. The pacing of this album is such a letdown. It's not the right juxtaposition of tones that was in their previous works, and even though the lyrics still cover the same dark subjects, the music and instrumental work just lack the bite to deliver anything substantial. The album's sonic sound is pretty much the same as all the stuff, but it lacks their experimental edge, and as I mentioned earlier, it just feels slower. And that itself is an ironic statement, as the album is technically only, it only contains 9 original songs and is their shortest album at just over 41 minutes. It sucks when it's not the band's fault, and I really wish that I knew what went wrong here. Jason and Kim play as well as they're allowed to, but they feel so restricted at times. But, I don't know. I just don't know with this one. My favourite song is probably the one with the worst name, that being Menstrual Case. Oh god, I didn't want to make that my favourite song, but it was the only, sort of good one. Dirty has its merits, but I wouldn't recommend giving it more than one listen. Let's hope that we can end this episode on a good note, eh? And finally, we reached the band's 5th album, Witches. Released in 2015, it was produced by Jason Sewell, and it was self-released, but with the help of a label, I think. I don't know exactly how it goes, but the band sided with the label called Standby Records, and I neglected to mention that up until this point. They were still are, with a label called Nebulost. Still, regardless of the circumstances, let's talk about the album itself. It's actually quite a unique take for the band, as it's a concept album about the Salem witchcraft hysteria in 1962, a goth punk band writing a concept album about maybe the most famous witch case in history. Do you even goth, mate? Anyway, this album limits its uses of outside musicians heavily, this time having one Damien Saul play violin and Alice Giuffreda, if I'm saying that first name right, and Veronica Thornley providing vocals on the song Witch Hunts. It's nice to have things on a smaller scale again, and when they tried asking for help last time, it wasn't so great, but I appreciate that they actually made it work here. The band do still retain a bit of the style that they explored on Dirty though, but this time it's better produced and fits the gloomy themes within the album's content. Kim seems to play a character of sorts in some of the songs, and it's a perspective that works well for me personally. Not just because she's a female goth punk lead vocalist, but because she's been singing about weird shit for almost a decade by this point, acting as though she's a witch isn't her type of the box, and I respect that they didn't get lazy with that. The album's sound and pacing is also a lot more controlled, with plenty of weird moments, but also maturity and restraint as well, and the writing seals the deal for me, being able to mix in their usual subjects with a unique spin thanks to the album's concepts. My favourite song overall would have to be A Rope for Mary, which mixes the dark concept, strong performances, and improved production for an album that is twisted and gruesome, and I mean that in the absolute best possible way. And that about does it for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and as always, feel free to tell me which albums you liked or disliked. I don't know if I would have a favourite. I think I would have to go for Monster, though. I did quite enjoy it. But regardless, I'll see you all next time on Backtracking. Next time I'll be covering the band Ginger. I'll probably see you this weekend, because I believe there's a UFC event. If there's not, there'll probably be Ginger next. Anyway, until then, thank you for watching. You're awesome. Bye-bye.